My name is Clark Duncan, and I serve as Vice President for Economic Development here at the Asheville Area Chamber and the Economic Development Coalition for Asheville and Buncombe County. Let me start by just expressing my great appreciation for the level of collaboration that I've seen across our public and private sectors during this crisis. I think it's truly one of the silver linings. They say, character is revealed in hard times, and this community has shown itself to be really resilient and hardworking during the incredibly challenging times of the past 7 weeks. The town halls we're holding today, I think, are another example of how our county and business community are working together in the greater interest of our residents. So let's talk for a moment before we kick off about what this meeting is and what it isn't. This meeting is definitely focused on giving the Buncombe County Health Department the opportunity to listen to business owners and best practices around safely conducting business as we continue to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. It's also a time for them to hear about the things that, frankly, we haven't figured out, whether it's where to obtain masks or sneeze shields or gloves, or how we can ensure social distancing is accomplished, or any one of the hundreds of other issues that business people will have to deal with operating during this time of public health crisis. It's also going to be about sharing best practices that you have developed or that you think will work for your specific industry. And this is why we're holding these town hall conversations by different industry sectors all across the economy of the Asheville region. What this meeting isn't, unfortunately, not a time to lobby the health department about whether or when we reopen. As much as we would all love that timeline, for planning purposes, we just don't have it yet. But we are going to hear from the county about the decision-making process and the data behind reopening. We're not going to come away from this call with a firm deadline, but we will start the conversation of reopening and recovery. What you will get is a better understanding of how these decisions are going to be made, and I, for one, appreciate that. At the Chamber and the EDC, we're going to continue to partner with the county to communicate both policy and the data behind public health policy making so that the business community can plan accordingly for our shared priority for everyone on this call, which is a safe and healthy return of the Buncombe County business community. So we are recording these sessions, and we're going to be asking you to make use of the chat feature, which is at the bottom of the screen there, to give your input. And we'll be asking questions throughout this town hall and ask for you to answer in the chat function. This is going to allow the health department to have a literal transcript and record of what you've said. And that's, we're doing 9 of these this week, so the transcript features will help greatly. Today, we're going to hear from Fletch Tove, Public Health Emergency Preparedness Director at Buncombe County. Thank you, Fletch, for being here. I know we're wearing you out this week, but you've been working around the clock for the last month, so this should be normal for you. When we then we'll ask representatives of this industry to join us and serve as conversation starters, if you will, to hopefully spark ideas, maybe questions you want to pursue, questions that come up in the comment section, and we'll ask those series of questions here via slides and ask you to respond. We hope that by doing this, we can identify any community-wide barriers that we need to address, that the health department will have a better context for decision-making, specifically around retail business reopening. That's the subject of the conversation today. And that you as a business owner or a business leader will be able to start your own preparations so we're ready for when that day comes. I also want to let you know that our goal for the day is collecting ideas. Just because we like an idea or it may get traction here, it doesn't guarantee that's the way things will go. It's the health department's ultimate responsibility to determine which ideas provide adequate safety. But I would personally like to thank and commend the county for providing these listening sessions and partnership as we plan for recovery. So that being said, a couple housekeeping functions. If you would keep your your call on mute so we can hear our speakers. And be sure to follow the chat function at the bottom of the screen with any questions you may have. Let's kick it off by asking Fletch Tove with Buncombe County Emergency Operations to give us an update and sort of set the stage for this call. Fletch, are you with us?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So just want to give a snapshot of where we stand as a state right now. So last week, Governor Cooper and Dr. Cohen laid out some metrics they're looking at to determine when the time is right for North Carolina to start reopening. Locally, we're trying to mimic that same data set with our local data so we could be on the same page as them. They also gave us their three-pronged approach to our roadmap to a new normal. And the three prongs of that are increased testing for the state, an increased capacity for contact tracing, which means when someone gets sick, we send a team out and find out everyone they've had close contact with for the previous 2 weeks and make contact with them to isolate and quarantine them for the disease. And the third phase of that is downward trends. So those three prongs, testing, tracing, and trends, will get us to reopening. Governor Cooper also laid out his phased approach to reopening, with phase one being a small lifting of restrictions for maybe 2 to 3 weeks. Phase two, changing the mass gathering guidance, relaxing his stay home order, allowing more businesses to open for 4 to 6 weeks into phase three. So I just want to get everybody in the mindset that this isn't a May problem we're looking at. This is a May, June, July solution, and that's best case scenario if we hit all our timeframes. If the data doesn't show what the state needs it to show, that might be extended, into late July, August, that reopening phase. So just want to set that stage there as we're looking at this discussion and what the timelines look like. That's it for my update. And I'll go ahead to the next slide. What we're talking about is how you can be prepared to reopen. Some of you guys might potentially fall into multiple phases of this reopening. We're waiting for some more details from the governor, some more specificity on, what actually is entailed in each of those phases, what kind of businesses will be allowed to reopen. Once we have that, we'll kind of put it together in our own local plan. Our intent is with our local guidance, going forward, we're going to relax some restrictions to be more aligned with the governor's plans. And so as he goes through these phases, we're doing our best to be more aligned with the state's approach to the best of our ability. So things to think about is, what measures you could put in place as you can reopen to maintain physical distancing, what supplies you might need, whether those are cleaning supplies, face coverings, how you manage your staff. Will you be able to do shift work? Will you have limited occupancy? Things like what's your sick leave policy look like for employees? Can you be more lenient? Can you do screenings as they come in every day? So if they are symptomatic, there's not an issue sending them home. Things like that. So that's kind of the discussion we'd like to have today. See what ideas you have as we start developing the local plan based on the governor's guidance, what kind of stuff we can be considering. What I hope to get out of it is you guys are the ones with the expertise in this retail field. So I'd like to see if you guys have any great ideas that maybe we haven't thought of as county government or public health that might be able to incorporate into our reopening strategy. I do want to point out that we are very aware of the secondary impacts our decisions have on the local economy and local business. And assure you that every discussion we have about reopening and our restrictions in public health, we have a long discussion about the impact on the economy, and it's in the forefront of our minds as we make these tough decisions. I just want to reassure you of that. And with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker.
Thanks, Fletch. Can I circle back real quickly, because you said something that that obviously testing is going to be critically important to the success of these next several phases of reopening. And I've actually heard some encouraging things from you and from Mission HCA about the prevalence or availability of testing and where that trajectory is. Can you share your thoughts on testing availability, and is it becoming more widely available?
Right. So testing is becoming more available as more resources come online, as the community labs and healthcare providers are shift to help with that need. It's not, as expanded as we like and as fast as we like, but it is increasing. So when we talk about the governor's three-pronged approach, more testing, we're getting there. We're getting more testing. For the state current guidelines on who gets tested, we have capacity for that. For the contact tracing, locally, we're developing a deep pool of personnel. So when the state establishes their platform and training, that we can quickly turn that and have a whole team trained for the capacity we'll need. Because we know when we see more testing, we'll see more positive cases, and we'll have to do more contact tracing. And for the trends locally, we're trying to distill the state trends from local data. And so some of those we're good on, some of them we're not, but we're mimicking everything at the state level locally to make sure we're in line with them and meeting those local needs to reopen.
Great. Thank you, Fletch. Let me introduce a couple guests that have joined us today. Carmen with Mass General Store, thanks for making time. And again, for bringing a little sunshine into our call. If you would unmute your call for a second. So talk to us a little bit about the scenario planning at Mass General Store. Where are you in your planning for reopening, and what are your thoughts?
Well, I just did something to my screen, so that's why I was fiddling. Sorry.
I can see.
Thank you for inviting me to come on. I'm pretty excited about hearing everybody's thoughts and ideas. For Mass General Store, it's a little different because I'm the general manager, and we still have our leadership team, the president, the vice president, that ultimately makes decisions. But we've had some good conversation, and there's no decisions obviously that have been fully thought out, but we're definitely in line with looking at, definitely a few more weeks probably before we can even let anybody in the building. We'll probably start curbside in the next week or so, with people ordering by telephone and then us placing it outside for them. When we can open, I've heard conversation about, the staff will all be having their temperature taken when they come in. We'll have masks and gloves to wear. There'll be plexiglass at the registers. We'll have to have some sort of stringent cleaning plan, like every hour to go through and just wipe everything. And we've just done preliminary thoughts. But that's our tentative plan, is to make sure. We're not sure how to go on the distancing. I've heard comment that it would maybe be 20% of what you normally can handle in your building is what might be allowed. And I think we're going to be a lot more cautious than that. I'm sure you've seen our store. It's more difficult to figure out how anybody can walk through the aisles and still leave enough space. Directional would be difficult. But we have discussed setting up our fixtures in a way that would be more of a snake system and starting at one end, but nothing for sure yet. We're still obviously listening, planning, talking, just trying to figure it out.
So I think most on this call are thinking through those exact same challenges that you are. And I think a recurring theme that we're hearing on these calls, whether we're talking to our healthcare community or our manufacturing community or our lodging community, our childcare community, is now is the time to start thinking through sort of, planning the work ahead and then work that plan, right? So knowing what your approach will be, if you're going to phase in, for example, with curbside, I think that's really smart. So let's zero in on a couple of the issues that you raise. And the first, of course, if you're in retail, is going to be occupancy and physical distancing, which even as we move through phase 1 and 2 and 3, I think it's safe to assume physical distancing is going to be with us for a while.
Absolutely.
Fletch, can you talk to us a little bit about what you think guidelines might be? Will we continue to talk in terms of physical individual distancing, or will we talk, for example, to our retail community in terms of occupancy rates like we do now with our grocery store providers?
Yeah, so I don't have a crystal ball, but we expect some more clarity from the governor in the next week or two about how those specifics for each phase will work. I think we can expect to see, and what if not, what we'll do locally is there's the masks help, but they have to be in conjunction with physical distancing. It all works together. So there'll probably be maybe phase one, the retail that can meet that physical distancing of 6 feet and remain open. Phase two might look something like where you're gonna surpass or be less than that physical distancing, but for short periods of time. And then phase three might be like the businesses who you have to have close contact to provide a service, like barber shops and things like that. Again, we'll see what kind of guidance the governor comes out with and see how that looks, but it's going to depend on that guidance, and we have to see what the data shows.
Great. Carmen, I have to say I appreciate the creativity of thinking about merchandising and the experience of your guest and your visitor. I think particularly because the character of our downtown is going to be smaller footprint shops. It's definitely important to start thinking through those physical layouts and how we can accommodate not only staff health, but good health practices for our customers. So great thought there about thinking about how can we perhaps adjust our merchandising so we are creating some more space and some more physical distance on premises. Let me also ask Jennifer Walker with Mountain Merch to unmute. Thanks for being with us, Jennifer. I know you've.
Hi, thank you, Clark. Can you hear
Yep, good to see you.
me?
So I know a lot of those things that Carmen mentioned are on your mind as well. Talk to us a little bit about Mountain Merch and what are your thoughts and potential early plans as you anticipate reopening and the recovery process in the weeks and months ahead. What does that look like for Mountain Merch?
Yes, I feel like I represent kind of a really smaller store. I don't feel like our store is like a Target or a Walmart where there'll be so many people I have to worry about direction of flow of traffic and all that. It's more about making the customer feel safe. I've talked to my employees about when they come back that we all have masks on, just everyday simple things to let the customer know that we're careful and their safety is our number one priority. And I think that will go a long way in making people feel good about your business.
I agree.
And I did masks for all of our employees.
I think you're going in and out a little bit, but I heard you.
Me?
Yeah, you're going in and out a little bit, but I think I heard you saying you're looking at masks as well.
Yes, so we have an embroidery business as well, and so we're going to create masks with their names on them. That is their mask, and they take them and wash them. They're rewashable, and then going allowed to, of course, work unless.
I'm gonna jump in for a second.
Also,
I think we're losing your.
These are open.
Jennifer, we're losing your Wi-Fi a little bit, so I'm going to jump in and pick up a thread that you started and that I also see in the comments section here, which is really our interest in creating a safe environment for our workers and our guests, and what does that look like, and who's going to be making those rules? Fletch and I have had this conversation in previous town halls. Fletch, I know business owners are curious about where does the county's guidance stop and start, and can they augment those rules, for example, in their own facilities with signage to say, hey, we require a mask in our shop, please comply. So help us understand where your guidance you think will stop and how it might fit hand in hand with our shop owners.
Right. So let me first talk about when we're talking about a mask versus a face covering versus a respirator. So at Public Health, we're trying to be very intentional when we use the language between a mask and a face covering. So a mask is something like a surgical mask or an N95 respirator or an N100. And we're trying to, there's still scarcity of those. There's still supply chain issues. So we're trying to conserve those for first responders, healthcare providers. So what the CDC guidance and what we're pushing is recommending people wear some kind of cloth face covering. That could be everything from a bandana to a folded t-shirt. There's designs how to make that, to the hand-stitched ones you're seeing a lot of people wear. And the benefits of that are that those are washable and they're not detracting from the supply of true PPE for first responders and medical professionals. So you could have two and you could alternate them and wash one day and wear them on the other day and use those for weeks, months for the duration of this, as opposed to the other masks where you might be able to use them for a week or two, but they're eventually going to lose form and function. And we're going to, as a nation, as we start doing that, we're going to burn through that PPE again. So first I want to set that clear that we're talking about face coverings of some variety and not specifically masks. And then the second part is to what extent those are applicable in Buncombe County. So from the guidance the governor has pushed out so far, it doesn't seem like he's going to enforce the use of those face coverings. It's similar to what we've done and just have a really strong recommendation for use when in public, particularly in areas where you can't do social physical distancing. So individual businesses can be more restrictive than state or local guidance, but you can't be less restrictive. So what that means is if your store, if you want to come into our store, you need to have a mask. As long as you're doing that in an equitable manner and consistent, you can do that. The same thing, we're getting the same question about capacity of people and patrons inside a store. Whatever the guidance from the state or the county is, if it's say 20% of fire code or occupancy or some ratio of square footage, if you want to be more restrictive than that and have less people, you can do that, but you can't be less restrictive. And I don't think the governor, from the language and from the guidance he's pushed out so far, is going to mandate the use of coverings out in public. It's worded as a strong recommendation right now, and we're having that discussion, but that's where our guidance currently is as well, a strong recommendation.
So yeah, there's definitely a strong thread here in the comment section from Heidi and from Kayla about masks. So we can set those guidelines for our customers as they come through the door, as long as we're equitable and we're asking the same thing of our staff and our customers that are coming in-house. Kayla, for example, was saying we're probably not going to allow folks to try on merchandise for the foreseeable future. So I think it comes back to a couple things that I'm also seeing. One is going to be communications within your establishment to make sure that you're creating that sense of welcome, obviously, which people find synonymous with Asheville in your shop. But then there's also this question of, can we have some backing from the community on best practices? And so what I have heard now, I think from conducting a number of these town halls, is it will probably be a combination of factors that can help us message in the community, right? One is going to be guidelines from the county that are going to be as much as possible sort of moving forward through that process with the state. But maybe there's need for almost a communications campaign, whether it's community-wide with our downtown association or our different business sectors across Biltmore Village or West Asheville, where we're communicating broadly, not just so it doesn't fall on the shoulders of you, the individual business, but that we're kind of all broadly talking about, here's some best practices that we want to embrace as residents and as visitors for everyone's sort of safe and healthy reopening.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick and say that's a great idea. We have a really great joint information center here from the county. We're working as we reopen. We'll definitely do that enhanced communication campaign focused on things like whatever the governors and our recommendations are with face coverings for social distancing. And we'll push that, through the chamber, through Explore Asheville, through all the resources in the community. So we really want to have that unified campaign. So you're seeing the same signage all over downtown, all over the county as you're going into retail as it starts to open up.
Fletch, while I've got you, another common theme in these town halls and then in the comment section here has really been about guidelines for sanitation and making sure that we're doing our best to keep our facilities safe and healthy. If Ellis is on the call again, I'm hoping she might be able to post those CDC guidelines. That was really helpful. Any thoughts on general guidance we can provide owners on how to maintain sort of best practices for keeping the place clean?
Yeah, if Ellis doesn't post it, I will in a minute. But we push people. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has a list of disinfectants and cleaners that are approved for COVID-19. And then the CDC has a bunch of guidance on cleaning practices and standards. And so we'll push that in the chat. It's a really great resources for that. And I'll go ahead, as we continue on, I'll post those there.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know.
There's Ellis. Ellis just starting to put them up. Thanks, Ellis.
On the spot. Thank you, Ellis. Yeah, whether or not you are maintaining your own maintenance or you work with local janitorial services, they have been on top of this since early March, working with businesses who have stayed open for as essential businesses. So I think there's a great understanding, a broad understanding of the CDC guidelines now, but they're not extraordinary. They are materials that you can easily find through janitorial supply services or even at retail stores. So definitely pay attention to those. The real kicker is frequency of cleaning those surfaces. So pay attention to that in the guidelines. There's also a great thread going in here around PPE. So maybe let's move on to what resources we think we will need, Heather. I see my friend Sarah Wood has been in the comments section. She has launched or helped launch a website across the state of North Carolina and regionally called supplyconnector.org, which is one of these platforms that has really come in to being to help connect the need for personal protective equipment, think masks and face shields and sneeze guards, with those that are making them. And so there's a real question right now as a retail owner, what sort of personal protective gear will I need for myself, for my employees, and then for my visitors, my guests, and of course, face coverings. I'm trying, Fletch, to get used to add that to my vernacular. What sort of face coverings are available? What do you see happening in the supply sector there in terms of availability to our business community that may need to start buying this equipment now?
So we know there's been a scarcity and supply chain issues with that level of PPE. We know, as time goes on, every week there's more suppliers and more resources coming out. So we're seeing that kind of flatten off. But, as a nation, as we start reopening up and those drawdowns happen really aggressively, we might see that shortage again. That's why we're really pushing cloth face coverings for that. And just as a reminder, so when you go out in public and we're asking you to wear a face covering, you're doing that to protect other people from you. And when other people are wearing their face coverings, they're doing that to protect you from them. So that's the intent of those face coverings. It's not to protect yourself, it's to protect others. And if everyone's doing it, everyone works together and gets protected. Just wanted to clarify that. But depending on the type of retail, gloves may or may not be recommended, just depending on what kind of items you're handling, the frequency of that. A lot of times just increased hand washing frequency and sanitation practices on items is going to be better. I think I've seen a lot of communications from different types of retail that they're not going to be allowing people to try on clothes or be handling merchandise for a while. I think that's a smart thing until we get a better grasp of what our trends look like.
I'm seeing a couple questions, for example, from our friends from Pearl's Yarn Emporium, that really face masks, particularly cloth face coverings, are now considered best practice, and those can be found pretty broadly. I think there are a lot of local folks making those and selling them online. Our friend Patty Torno down in the River District, you might as well look good while you're in quarantine, is making some beautiful face masks. So I think locally there's a great opportunity to source those face coverings locally. And as Fletch has pointed out numerous times, those are washable. So you're not going to be running through high volumes of medical grade PPE. You can really lean on these face coverings for your own internal use. I see Jennifer is back on. Good to have you back.
Thank you. I wanted to show you some of the masks. We made these for Bottle Riot. So we've been making these for a lot of the businesses just so that they can reuse them. They're washable. They're made of t-shirt material. It's actually a really good reputable t-shirt company that we buy our t-shirts from. And so we can put your logo on it or whatever or nothing. But these are great because they wash just like a t-shirt, and that's how many times you can use them.
I think face coverings are going to become the new branded gear, right? Like this.
Yeah.
So feel free to put your website.
You also know what company you're with, so.
Go ahead and put your website in the comments section there, Jennifer. If people are interested in procuring some masks, they might as well be masks that have some branding on it as we move through this next phase of reopening.
And one thing I wanted to say that when I got cut off is I had collected a lot of policies from different kinds of businesses reopening, and even doctors' offices, just to see what they were telling their employees. And just, I think if everyone just kind of does that, because everyone is so different, and it's going to just be about making, the customer feel safe.
I think the other recurring theme that you may have missed out on when you dropped off the call is the need for really consistent communications around both what our community standards are, and then what your particular standards are within your place of business. So I think now is the time, as the county and the state are giving us a little lead time, saying this is coming in the next several weeks and months, to be thinking about the quality of our communications, where they're posted, and particularly for a community that's as focused on hospitality as we are, how we're communicating that broadly in the interest of everyone's safety and well-being. I saw a question here on gloves. Fletch, any thoughts or guidance on the necessity of gloves at this point? Or is it just really come down to hand sanitation?
Hand sanitation is pretty much always going to be the best bet. I saw that question. We need to have more of a discussion about how we break that down. There's a lot of complexity when you talk about the benefits versus disadvantages of glove use and what kind of specific retail business it might make sense for and not make sense for. We just want to make sure we're consistent and have a good plan before we give some better guidance on that. But when we get to that point, maybe it'll come from the governor as well. We'll be sure to push that.
Great. Thank you. So I would encourage all of our participants, thank you to everyone who's using the group chat function. Please continue to dig deep and ask any questions you have there. We're going to try to keep circling back to those as we move through this process. One thing, even though I think these conversations are helpful to have in these niche sections, we're having healthcare and communications. We've talked to our childcare providers yesterday, manufacturing later this afternoon. But we're also able to pull a lot of best practices from some of our business community that has had to stay open and fully operational throughout this. One thing we have seen our manufacturing community adhere to is the sense of sort of voluntary health screening on a daily basis. Whether it's an informal piece of paper where you're answering questions in the morning as you come into the facility, or even an automated app that sends you a questionnaire the night before you go to work and asking you, how are you feeling? Are you symptomatic? have you had any exposure that's concerning to you? I think that's something to think about in terms of something that can scale, whether you have a small staff or larger staff. Fletch, would you have any guidance for employers in terms of what they should be asking their own staff, and then maybe what they need to be looking for in terms of visitors that are coming in?
Right. So for staff, everyone, as we start to reopen, should be doing daily screening of staff coming in. We've seen different ways that some businesses who've been open have been doing that. Some actually have some people come in and do like actually on paper answer questions, a couple questions every morning. Some people kind of have established like a social contract that says, as you clock in for the day, you're affirming that you don't have any symptoms. We get a lot of questions about thermometers and temperature taking. So our current guidance on that is that if you have the resources to do the temperature taking, like the thermometers, and you can do that. But the issue is half or maybe much more than half of the people who have COVID-19 aren't going to be displaying a fever. So it might give this false sense of security where somebody might have 3 or 4 symptoms, but say, oh, I only have a 98 or 99, I'm fine. And that's, we have a concern about that. So we're not really, as public health, we're not really pushing for everyone to have thermometers right now and be doing that. But if you do thermometers, you have to understand that that's not a standalone checker. You need to do that in conjunction with some standard symptom questions. And we could put that resource up as well. Ellis, if you want to chime in or put that resource up for the questions. But everybody should be doing some level of screening on a daily basis just to check in with your employees as they come in to make sure they're not feeling symptoms. We know across the nation, some people have been doing it for customers as well. We don't have guidance on that yet, but it's a discussion we're having.
Sarah, thanks for your thought on PSA videos. I think you will see those forthcoming, whether they're out of our county public health or our chamber or any number of our sort of business partners across Buncombe County. I think this idea that we will have sort of a broad and coordinated communication strategy just makes a lot of sense. And we'll be rolling out a checklist for reopening that follows a lot of these best practices here in the next week or so. There was a question, Fletch, that I want to circle back to, which is kind of a worst case scenario. What happens if a staff member becomes ill? How do we integrate reporting and contract tracing initiatives that maybe you're already undertaking at the county level? Yeah,
so contact tracing has been, it always is a function of public health. We always do that for a variety of things. So if you have an employee who becomes symptomatic, you should be sending them home. You shouldn't be allowing them to come home, and they should be contacting their healthcare provider. If they don't have a healthcare provider, an urgent care, if that's not available, they can contact public health for follow-up. If they do end up being positive, we'll conduct the contact tracing and alert everyone who needs to be to conduct quarantine. What you should be doing on the business level, and Ellis, feel free to chime in here, but if you have somebody who's been working sick, you need to have those people who had close contact with them while they were symptomatic or before really closely monitoring themselves, self-monitoring more than once a day for symptoms. So not just the daily check-in, but they should be doing their temperature a couple times a day, should be monitoring themselves for feeling feverish or any of the other CDC given symptoms.
This is Ellis. Yeah, I'll chime in real quickly. For any positive case, they are contacted by a communicable disease nurse who then does follow up to look for any close contacts, and all of the close contacts are contacted so that we can monitor them throughout the infectious period. So you as an employer may get contacted by a communicable disease nurse so that we can identify any other employees who may have been exposed to the positive case. This is something we have been doing and will continue to do forever.
And just to clarify, Ellis and Fletch, it looks like they were also perhaps more focused on contact tracing for customers. So
Yeah.
that is something that they would learn through the tracing process. Yeah.
Right. It happens the same way. If somebody becomes positive and the nurses initiate their contact tracing, if it turns out, they've been to one of the stores or something and it meets criteria, they'll be reaching out and doing that.
Yeah.
Russ just made a great point in the chat. Russ Towers, good to see you, man. Designating different entrances, for example, and exits for your employees just makes sense. If your facility is large enough that you can create zones where you're limiting exposure, manufacturers are doing this all across the county and the region right now. If it makes sense for you, that's something to think about. Designating maybe restrooms or entrances or exits where you're just sort of limiting how much exposure you might have. I think that's a smart practice. Ellis, I didn't mean to.
I was just going to clarify a little bit that with customers, it's going to depend on what type of business that you're running. When we're doing contact tracing, we're really looking at who is a close contact, and that means being within 6 feet for about 10 minutes or more. So depending on what type of business you run, you may want to think about the activities that happen, and is there a way where clients are going to be having these prolonged exposures? Would you be able to provide public health with who those customers are? That's just something you might want to be thinking through.
Yeah, and I also want to chime in on Russ's comment where logistically possible, some people might use more than one door or modify the entrances and exits. That's a great strategy. We just want to be able to ensure that when we're doing that, we're not doing anything that would violate fire code. We don't want to do anything that would be a permanent barrier for an entrance or an exit. We just want to be careful we're not going to trap people in a building with any of those measures.
Sarah makes a great point here that really the more clear the guidelines are that come from the state and from the county, that's certainly to be appreciated. And then I think it keeps trickling down, right? The more clear we can be as business owners to our staff, what expected protocols are and what expected behaviors are for our customers that come into our places of business. That clear communication all across the board is going to be key. I had another question that we just saw for the first time, and I think makes sense because this is a retail-focused conversation, which is the differentiating between cash and credit card exchanges. Is there guidance there, Fletch, that we should pay attention to?
So we've been seeing a lot of people try to do card only or even the tap exchanges. One thing we have to keep in mind is that that's not a resource for everyone. We want to be equitable. Some people aren't going to have that technology or capacity and will be paying in cash. And fundamentally, it all comes down to hand hygiene, and whether that's hand sanitizer, in some cases gloves, or just washing hands consistently, that's going to be the best approach to that. So we want to make sure we're not cutting out sections of the community by going cashless.
Right.
And I saw another question about from Michael about pedestrian zones and allowing for more space. I think that's a great point, but that's a little out of our realm in public health. But that's a good question for the city and county level leadership.
I've seen a few questions, Fletch, that I've heard you talk about, which are the metrics and the data points that you're looking at from a public health perspective. They're really not just specific to Buncombe County, which has had, I think it's safe to say, we've effectively avoided a surge so far in this community. But what other data points are you looking at? For example, being so close to other states that are following different guidelines. I think it's probably good for everyone to hear that you're watching that progress as well.
Right. So Dr. Cohen and Governor Cooper have set forward some metrics we'll be looking at internally for the state for those downward trends. We do know several neighboring states are aggressively reopening and opening their communities up. We talk about Charlotte and has a lot of cases. Triangle has a lot of cases. But one thing we haven't seen as much in the conversations, Greenville, South Carolina, just closer than Charlotte, has almost 700 cases, and they're opening their community up. We know Tennessee just had their biggest single-day spike of cases this week, and they're opening their stores up. And we know Georgia also has upward trends. So one of the things I've been telling people is time is one of our best assets here. We have time, so we can see what kind of happens as these states around us reopen, whether it has a direct impact on Western North Carolina, whether we could look at what happens internally to those states to change our decision-making. I'm sure the governor's looking at those. And if for whatever reason things go well for those states, he might consider accelerating his timeline. If things, as they're predicted right now, get worse for those states, he might, reinforce that he's going to stick to his timeline. But we're looking at all that stuff. One thing I try to communicate is we've taken a lot of proactive and aggressive measures here in the county, and I think that's reflected in our low case count compared to some other metropolitan areas in the state. Of the top 10, we're the lowest case count of those, and I think that's reflected there. And we don't want to we know all the sacrifices all the community and you guys have made over these last couple months, and we don't want to waste those sacrifices by moving too fast and getting back up to a quick case count, seeing that epi curve that as if we didn't even make those sacrifices. So we want to be very slow and deliberate and take our time now that we've afforded ourselves time to have a good strategy as we reopen and be safe with that. It would be more detrimental to move too fast and then have to do everything again than just to take our time and do it right the first time.
Right. I particularly appreciate having the conversation today because I've talked to businesses that say, hey, I might need 2 to even 6 weeks to be able to reopen my business, whether those are staffing considerations or inventory considerations, sanitation considerations. So it's really, I think, good to reiterate throughout these town halls this week that now is the time to be thinking about everything that I've heard, come across the questions, which is let's make a plan for your specific place of business. Think about sanitation guidelines and regularity of cleaning. Think about social distancing and the comfort level of, facial coverings. Start sourcing those materials now, because this is going to be with us. Even as we open, we are going to be adhering, I think, pretty strictly to physical distancing and facial covering requirements for some time until we're safely beyond the threat of the disease. And health screening, I think thinking about how to effectively health screen your staff and potentially your guests, and then work that plan and make sure it's communicated effectively to your staff.
I also think another conversation we're having, and we're trying to develop a strategy, this comes from our communications plan, but just because we're reopening doesn't mean the community necessarily will be comfortable coming out for retail and for commercial purposes. So we're we're having that discussion, and maybe there's some ideas that can come up from you guys. Once we get to the point where we can start slowly opening, how do we encourage the community to let them know it's safe, let them know the standards we put in place, and kind of lessen their fears of being out in public.
And I think that's, again, where we're going to need to rely on this cross-sector collaboration of the public and the private sector to make sure we're communicating pretty consistently. There's a consistent thread here on the Q&A on sort of a genuine fear. We want our workplace and our employees and ourselves to be safe, even though we want the economy to return. So following these guidelines consistently and making sure, even as we do start to reopen and welcome visitors in the months ahead, that we are very clear about any visitor to the community, whether they are friend or family or tourist, what our standards and protocols are going to be for everyone's well-being. And I think that's going to be key for us to continue to keep those channels open. I would point out on the screen a really important question. The county is really keen on knowing where you might see gaps or where you're seeing challenges. So I think we've heard a lot about consistency of communication, and I think you're going to see the county as we work through these phases really make data-driven decisions and provide guidelines. But then it's going to be up to us to turn around and communicate those guidelines and follow those protocols in our own places of business. But any specific gaps you'd like to elevate here for the county or to us in the chamber community, as we're approaching our end of the hour here, I definitely encourage you to put those in there so that our public minds are thinking about how we might be able to address shortages where they're perceived.
I did see something earlier. Somebody was talking about a campaign, kind of like the Go Local campaign, playing off of that, like the Go Local, Go Safe. If you guys have good ideas about how to market and kind of brand that big campaign messaging strategy, we'd love to hear those too. I think maybe working off that Go Local existing campaign might be a good starting point, but we're open to creative ideas like that as well as we try to develop that communication strategy.
Thanks, Fletch. Yeah, I likewise picked up on that. I think there's a real opportunity there for us. I tell you what, as I sort of lead into our closing, let me invite you to do a couple things in the chat section. One is, again, please let us know if you see any gaps that you're concerned about for your particular business or for retail at large or for hospitality at large. Please feel free to continue to leave them in there. And the county and the chamber are also really interested in getting your feedback on this experience and on this format. Is it helpful for you? I think speaking of communications in the world of Zoom calls, which I think we're all starting to loathe, we're all going to have to lean more into these formats. So any suggestions you have for improvement, if you have value in these calls, please give us a little bit of feedback there so we can make sure they continue to add more value. Most importantly, if you still have questions, there are a couple places for communication here on the slide. One is business@buncombecounty.org. Invite you to send any questions for follow-up there that were not covered on this call. And for all the business owners and business leaders on the call, I would also ask your attention to that second website, which is ashevillechamber.org/coronavirus. We've recently launched a second survey. I promise it is minimal in the time it will ask of you, but this is the only survey in Buncombe County that captures all sectors of our economy. And we've been relaying that real-time snapshot to our policymakers and our friends here locally at the city and the county, as well as our state delegation. So please take a moment to take that survey. It's super informative to understand where we are today, 7 and 8 weeks into this, what your concerns are, and specifically what kind of policies you're needing for the sustainability and the viability of your business and the valuable jobs that you provide our community. Finally, I think together we are certainly more resilient. So I thank each of you for joining the conversation and the chat today. It's fantastic to see so many faces. I, for one, am ready to get back to a world. I don't think this telecommuting thing is going to appeal to me for the long term. So it's fantastic to see you all. Thanks to our partners. Thanks to Jennifer with Mountain Merch, Carmen with Mass General, Fletch, of course, for all of your time and energy on the phone today, and to all of our partners in local government who are focused on keeping us safe and healthy. We appreciate you, and we look forward to keeping in close touch. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.